Welcome to this exciting episode of Miss Max Academy. We're in Ch4 Quiz A. Let's take a moment and read the prompt. A survey conducted in a college intro stats class asked students about the number of credit hours they were taking that quarter. The number of credit hours for a random sample of 16 students is given in the table. We can see here that 2 students took 10 credit hours, 1 student took 12 credit hours, 1 student took 14 credit hours, 4 students took 15 credit hours, etc., etc. So let's just take a minute and put this data in our calculator. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. All right, so we do that by hitting our stat key. And when we hit our stat key, you notice this menu shows up. And we're just going to hit either the number 1 or the enter key. That's going to bring us our list, and we are going to enter our data in the list. So while I'm talking, please continue to enter this data in your list. Okay, so now that we're done entering our data, we're going to find some information about our data. We're going to find the mean, the median, we're going to find the standard deviation, we're going to find our 5-number summary. So let's take a look. How do we do that? Well, again, we hit our stat key, we arrow over to calculate, and our first menu is one variable statistics. We have one variable here. It is a quantitative variable and it's credit hours. So we would like to know our one variable statistics. So either you press the number 1 or hit enter. And voila! You get the one variable statistics for our data. So let's read the variables that we need to be most concentrated on right now. X bar. X bar always represents our sample mean. So the mean for this data is 16.3125. That's credit hours. Okay, so that's going to help us answer prompt B. S with the little subscript X is the standard deviation of our sample. Okay, the standard deviation of our sample is 3.7 credit hours. Okay, there were 16 data in our sample. The minimum data value was 10. Quartile 1 is 14.5. Our median was 16. Quartile 3 was 20. And our maximum data value is 22. Okay, so let's use this information to answer some of these questions. I'm going to hold off on part A. I'm going to go back to that in a moment. Let's take a look at part B. Find the mean and standard deviation for number of credit hours. Well, again, our mean is the X bar. So our mean is 16.3125 credit hours, and our standard deviation is 3.7, roughly, credit hours. And here you go. You in fact see that those are the 2 correct answers. The standard deviation is the spread about the mean. We'll talk more about that as we progress further into this class. Let's take a look at C. Find the median and the IQR for the number of credit hours. IQR is an acronym for interquartile range. Okay, so the median is given right here. Our median is 16. So we know the median is 16 credit hours. The interquartile range is Q3, which is 20, subtract Q1, which is 14.5. So here you go. Our median is 16 credit hours. Our interquartile range is Q3, take away Q1, which would give us 5.5 credit hours. Again, let's take a look at part D. Is it more appropriate to use the mean and the standard deviation or the median and the IQR to summarize these data? Well, we know when we summarize data, we want to talk about shape, center, spread. Well, when we talk about center, we're either going to talk about the mean or we're going to talk about the median. We talk about the mean if our graph is roughly symmetric, bell-shaped. We talk about the median if our graph is not so symmetric or skewed in either direction. So now we have to take a look at our graph before we answer part D. Let's go back to our calculator. We have all this information in our calculator, so we're going to use our calculator to help us create a histogram. There we go. So we're going to hit second y equals, and we're going to come up to this menu right here. This is our stat plot menu. That means we're going to be plotting information that are in our lists. Okay, so hit second y equals. It's right below your graphing window. And we're just going to hit the number 1, or again that enter key, and we're going to change some information here. We're going to turn our first plot on. We're going to arrow over and select a histogram because that's what they asked us to do. If you have a colored version, the color will say, pick a color, blue, red. Some of you don't have this option, but some of you do. Okay, so we have turned our plots on. We've created a histogram. But before we hit the graph key, we need to talk about the window. Well, we know our minimum value is 10 and our maximum value is 22 along the horizontal axis. So our horizontal window, our x variable, I think the minimum should be a little bit smaller than 10, which I put 9. And the max is a little bit bigger than 22, so I put 23. And I scaled my graph by 2. So that means the first bar would be the number of students who had 9 or 10 credit hours. Okay, and let's see, I think I can show you the rest of this. Then let's talk about our y min. I know there's at least 0 entries in each bar. However, I show y min is -1 so I can see where the x and y axes meet. My y max, there's certainly no more than 8 of any particular data type. Okay, so that's plenty. And I'm going to scale my y-axis by 1. Now I'm going to hit the graph key. And voila! Here is my histogram and my graphing calculator. If you hit the trace key, you'll notice your icon appears at the top of the first bar. It tells you the numbers in this bar are any numbers 9 but less than 11, so 9 and 10 credit hours. Notice there's no decimals here, okay? And there are 2 students who said they had either 9 or 10 credit hours. As a matter of fact, 2 students had 10 credit hours. And you can arrow over and find out how many are in each bar using that trace function. That's very nice. So this is a beautiful graph, but we need a little bit. So let's take a look at exactly what the graph should look like. And notice, if I set up my window, my graph in fact does look almost identical to their graph. Okay, we need labels. Our horizontal label would be credit hours. Our vertical label would be frequency. And in this case, the frequency was a count. For example, there was one person who had 11 or 12 credit hours. So I look over here. Oh yeah, in fact, there was only one person who had 12 credit hours. So in this case, we had frequency as counts, okay? And again, we need a title for our graph. This is the histogram of credit hours. Okay, so now we have a histogram. Well, is this histogram roughly symmetric? Let's see, does it look like a bell shape? No, right? It's not very bell-shaped. So I would say, yeah, it's not really that symmetric. So when I describe this distribution of this data, when I say shape, center, spread, I'd say, well, it's definitely unimodal, right? There's more students who have 20 credit hours than any other. Oh, actually, is it bimodal? Is this, oh, because, no, this is 10, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16. Oh, there's only 4 that have 15. Oh, because this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, is this 19 and 20? Oh, I can see that. Okay. So this is, in fact, bimodal. There are 4 people who have 15 credit hours, and there are 4 people that have 20 credit hours. It's just not shown in the graph because, for example, this is 13 and 14, this is 15 and 16, and you can clearly see there are 4 people. However, this is 20 and 20, no, this is 19 and 20, and there are 5 people in the range 19 and 20. Okay, that makes sense. So the question D is it more appropriate to use mean and standard deviation or median and IQR to summarize these data? Well, my graph isn't really very symmetric, so I would say it's more appropriate to use median and IQR. When the graphs are not symmetric, we use median to describe the center. We use IQR, interquartile range, to describe the spread, and the shape, let's see, I would say this is skewed to the left. Those would be the 3 appropriate descriptions. I would say it's skewed left, that's the shape. I would use median, that's the center, and I describe the spread using the IQR. Okay, so it is more appropriate to use the median and IQR to summarize these data because the data are not unimodal and symmetric. That's kind of what I said. Excellent. I hope you enjoyed this version, Miss Max Academy.